Hi, everyone. As Nir said, I'm Maayan Glikser. I'm the CTO of 500 Tech. And today, I've come to talk to you about hooks and their place in state management. So what are hooks, anyway? They were announced last year at ReactConf. And basically, at the same day the announcement came, we already saw thousands of code examples and libraries people used to try hooks and figure out what they can do with them. So why are people so excited about hooks? What makes them so special people couldn't wait to use them? So hooks let us organize stateful logic inside components into reusable isolated units. So, okay, basically, they let us share logic between components, but we can already do that. So why do we need it? So in order to figure that out, let's go a bit to the past of React. So we're going to go through a small history lesson to see how did we start and how did we go forward. So back in the days of React 0.x, we had something called mixins, where mixins allowed us to share functionality between our components. Mixins allowed us to define methods that were monkey-patched into our React components. So basically, we would write a mixin with all the methods we need, and then specify the mixins in our component that we want to use. However, this had a couple of issues. The first one, we could have name collisions between different mixins. So basically, we didn't know which mixin defines what, and we had to be very, very careful. In addition to that, we also had some magic methods or properties where we didn't know where they came from. This was okay when it was a small component, a small application, but once we have a couple of mixins, we have no idea what the function comes from, where it comes from. So time went forward, and we went over to React 15. And since React 15 came out, we started using JavaScript classes as our React components. But JavaScript classes didn't support mixins. And that was okay, because the React team understood mixins had too many issues and decided they need another solution. So when they released React 15, they posted a blog post introducing higher-order components, which are basically wrappers for our own components. We write a function that returns a new component that wraps our own component, and everything we need passes via props. So when we use a higher-order component, we just activate that function on our component and get a new one. But this had a couple of disadvantages. First, we still had naming collisions, where we used several higher-order components together. Another issue was that our components started being wrapped by many, many other components. And eventually, we got to a state where unwrapping our components and trying to figure out where it is. So this is called by React wrapper hell. And this is an example of how complex it can be. And we never want to go into that. So because we still didn't have a good solution, the community started looking out, how can we solve this better? So Michael Jackson posted a tweet which inflated a large debate, which actually created a new paradigm we use today, which is called render props. So with render props, we just write components that accept a function that we call with our data. So when we use it, basically we get our extra logic and data right away at the correct place, and we always know where it came from. But in real application, that really didn't work out, because once we have a lot of data and our application is complex, basically we end up with this. So before we had our nesting in the dev tools, but now it's inside our code, so that's actually worse. So the React team decided they need to fix this issue and introduced hooks. So if I had to describe hooks in one sentence, it would be hooks are small units of logic which are easy to reuse and test. That sounds very familiar. It sounds a lot like functions. We run them, we get back a result, and it's very easy to test them because we just run them with expected input and get always the same output. The benefit of hooks is that they are also stateful and they can save state between renders. So when we use hooks, we don't need to care how they're implemented, where they come from. We just call a function, get our parameters, and just use them. And if we care about what they do, then we can just hop into the function and see what happens there. It can be completely isolated, and the entire life cycle of where the data come from, how it persists, it can all be in one place surrounding it. So one of the demos Dan Abramov showed in React, someone made an illustration of how the code changed from a class component to hooks. So basically, we wrap all functional logic into one place instead of spreading it around. But, okay, hooks are local state, but how do we share data between components? So the first rule of React is lift the state up. Find a common parent and define the state there. But as we know in large application, that doesn't really work well. So when we can't do that, we use React Context. And React Context allows us to basically define a provider which holds all the data and the logic, and we can consume them with consumer components to get them from the context anywhere in the tree. And also we can use the useContext hook to allow us to access that. However, there are a couple of issues. When we have a lot of providers in our large application, we end up like this. And this illustrates the first problem with context. Whenever data changes in one of the providers, it re-renders everything below it. So that's not a good pattern for high-performance applications. So afterwards, people started using providers at specific features. But this introduced a new issue. What happens if I want to use user data from our accounts provider? Now I have to move them. Or if they need data from each other, then I need to create a third provider that can access them. So this isn't maintainable for large apps. And when context isn't enough, there is a solution. Where do we go from here? To external state management. So in external state management, we decouple the state from our component tree. This means we can access it from anywhere in a tree, and it's not coupled together, so our data is always available. And this allows us to do some cool things. For example, direct subscriptions. So we can have every component connect to exactly the data it needs and only render when that data changes, which context doesn't allow us to do. Basically, with context, we can do a render bailout, which means if we listen to a certain context, if something changed that we don't care about in a specific component, we can't stop the render of our component. And state management solutions do solve that for us. Another issue is moving from context or local state to state management includes a large refactor depending on the state management solution that you chose. But what if it could be easier? What if we could just hop and spread a little magic and everything just works? So in order to introduce that, I'd like to invite Adam Klein, our CEO, to the stage.
I'm Adam Klein, CEO of 500 Tech, as Maayan said. And I have a small confession. I really love dad jokes. Who likes dad jokes? A few people, it's okay. I feel the sympathy. So Maayan talked about why we need state management, in which cases, and what we expect from it, and why we love hooks so much. And what I want to show you is I want to go back to a bug that pretty much started Flux and state management at Facebook. Cool. So this is not Facebook. I recreated the Facebook UI. Looks similar. Pretty much, right? So the bug was that they had the unread message notification here out of sync between different parts of the application. So you could see like you have new messages, but then you open it and you actually read the messages or vice versa. And that bug kept coming back, and it led them to understand that they need an external store mechanism that's decoupled from the componentry, which has a single source of truth that every component can subscribe directly to. So I wanted to bring you back to what started everything. And to demonstrate like a mocked version of the bug, I prepared a dead joke generator bot that whenever I type a message to like my dad, it answers back with a dead joke. So, want to hear a joke about construction? I'm still working on it. Okay, got a few dead joke lovers in the crowd. So besides the joke, you can also see that we have an unsynchronized state. So here it says 3, and here it says 4. Well, actually, it's because I have just local state in the header and local state in the footer. I don't have any state management here. Let's look at the code. So in the code, we have the header component, and we have the footer component, and both of them are using the use chat messages custom hook that I wrote. Should I make it larger? Or it's okay? Okay, cool. And the header component is also using the same custom hook. And the custom hook is simply defining state. So we have the messages, and we have the read index, like until where the user already read. And we have some logic to change the state. And then we have like a computed value which says what's the unread count. So we have everything here, but it's local state. So obviously every component has its own state. So what we want to do is pull it out to like an external store. Now, if you use a different state management solution that doesn't use hooks, now you'll have to convert your local state, which uses hooks, to a different kind of state management solution. And I'm sure it happened to all of you because you start with local state, and then you realize you need to bring it up to the global state. And we really want to use hooks in our stores. So now, we're going to use a library called Reusable to do that. And if you look at the custom hook, it's actually a store, right? It has state. It has logic that changes the state. It can have side effects. It has computed values, like memoed values. And it also has like encapsulation, because we're just returning what we want. It's like a public API. So what if we could just write, create, store, and pass it the entire custom hook, and say, I want this to be my store. And that's the API that Reusable gives us. And it just works. It makes the custom hook shared. Well, not quite. You just need to add a Reusable provider at the top, and Reusable tells us about it. So let's add the Reusable provider and surround our app with it. And now, it works. I think it's time for another dad joke, right? Thanks for that single clap. I liked it. Single clap is enough for me. Let's look at another dad joke. Why couldn't the bicycle stand up by itself? It was too tired. Thank you. That deserved the applause. And you can also see like the unread messages in sync. So what this actually does is it takes this custom hook, transforms it into like a singleton store, And what we get back is a hook that subscribes to this store and gets back the value, which is this. So we get a direct subscription to the store inside our components, but it's a singleton store. Now, Maayan also talked about dependencies between stores. So let's imagine we have this mock, another store that we created, which holds the current user. I'm just doing like a pseudo, it's not a pseudo implementation, but it's a simple implementation, just one state. And we want to use this store inside another store. We have dependencies between our stores. So what we can do is just use it. So here we're inside the chat messages store. We're just using the hook that subscribes to the current user store, and it just works. So you don't have to worry about provider order, because everything is horizontal, right? From every store, you can depend on every other store. Now, Maayan also talked about selectors. So sometimes we don't want to update our components every time something in the store updates, just one specific thing. So let's bring the body component, which is another component here that I wrote. And what it does, it also subscribes to the store, gets the messages, and displays the messages length. That's the only thing it needs to display. I also added like this render count, so you can see how many times the component re-rendered. So now it rendered one time. The message count is 3. And if we change the number of unread messages, it gets re-rendered again because it's subscribed to the entire store. But actually, it doesn't need to re-render because the message count didn't change. You want another dad joke? Are you awake? Whenever the cashier at the grocery store asks my dad if he would like the milk in a bag, he replies, "No, just leave it in the carton." It's like a joke that it takes time. I hear the laughter rolling in. So we want to fix this, not the joke, the selector. So now what we can do with Reusable is provide a selector, just like the new React Redux hooks API. So it's just a function that takes the entire state, and we get back what we want from it, which in this case is just the length. You can also get back an object and do a shallow compare. So we just need the message length. And now, if we change something that doesn't affect the component, it will not re-render. It will just re-render if the message count changes. Single clap. Thank you. No, single. Let's try again. Single clap. So the final thing that I want to talk about is like take a step back and out of our application and look at the entire ecosystem. Because when you write code, you use packages that other people write, whether it's inside your company or from NPM, like the open source ecosystem. And a lot of times these packages need global state management. It could be forms library or a router or localization library, whatever. It also needs global state management. So I prepared this mock package called useLocalization, and I'm going to use it inside the header component. So it holds the current locale. It also has a reusable store behind it, which is stored globally. And I'm going to display it here. If the locale is in English, I'm going to display a message in English, otherwise in Hebrew. And now this is like an external library. I didn't do any wiring. I didn't do any initialization code, and it just works. And that's great because when we define our reusable provider, we don't have any initialization code. We don't need to say which stores we're using. Every reusable store will automatically hook into our reusable provider. So it really allows us to create these encapsulated packages that have state management. You can just take it, put it somewhere else, and it will work. And I think that really allows to to make the stores reusable. That's why it's called reusable. So what I also did in this package is create a component that's called locale switcher. So it's a component that I get from the reusable locale. And it also connects to the same global store. So it also displays the language in English. And if we change to Hebrew, then it affects the singleton store, and all of the UI will update accordingly. And it's using hooks, so basically your stores are just custom hooks, so they can use other custom hooks that you've written. The same way that your local hooks can use custom hooks that you've written or that you bring from the ecosystem. And the last thing to say was that we wrote Reusable. We've been using it in some private projects, and it's on NPM, it's got tests and TypeScript and everything. It's very early, it's actually the first time we're announcing it, so I'm very excited. As you can see, it's just now starting. And we would really love you to give us some feedback, because we've been using it internally and we really like it. And if you have any suggestions or feedback, we would love to hear about it. And I think we're done. Thank you.